But welcome to our, what I hope will be a really engaging and interactive session about investing younger. Seeing as there are so few of us, would people mind putting on their cameras? We're gonna make this more of a class than a lecture, and try and have a nice debate. So I'll get into what we're trying to do today. I think by way of introduction, my name is Josh, and I'm going to be joined by a colleague. Her name's Tokozum Jo, and two graduates of our programs, one from our Anzisha Prize Fellowship, his name is George Bucker, and Belinda Monemo, who is a graduate or an alumnus of our African Leadership Academy program. And we're here to talk about very young entrepreneurship, and particularly how to go about funding very young entrepreneurship. It's not as easy as one thinks, and we've put together a fund that we've been trialing for the last year, and we're going to share some of the insights from that. So before we start, I want to just quickly get some people to do some things in the chat with me. The first is, let's just get a sense of the cities, not the countries. We know Africa relatively well, so maybe put the city you're in right now in the chat so we get a sense of where you are, and maybe we can contextualize some of our discussion to where you're from. And at the same time, we're talking about trust today. So who in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, and it's not a person's name, it's a type of person, do you think is most trusted? So this could be lawyers, mentors, accelerators, investors. Who within the African entrepreneurship ecosystem is most trusted by entrepreneurs? Pop that in the chat, as well as the city you are from. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for joining us. I'm seeing some city answers, but I haven't seen anyone put who they think is the most trusted ecosystem player. You can just put that in the chat. Angels they know is tomorrow's answer. Any other answers? Okay, so while the answers come in, I'm just going to speak to the rationale we have for our fund. One of the big challenges you have when you're an education institution is that you're deeply trusted as mentors and teachers by young people. And what happens is when you introduce money into that relationship, things change very dramatically, or could change for the worst. So if you turn from teacher to investor, and you're suddenly you're not as able to have an easy conversation about what's in the interest of the young person and their growth, irrespective of the fact that you're expecting a return on capital. We and others have found that changes the relationship. So when we were designing our fund, we came up, that was our primary criteria. How do you deploy capital in a way that doesn't change the trust dynamic between an education institution and alumni of its programs? So that was our sort of design constraint. I'm going to tell you a story of our program, and I'm going to tell you a story of our fund, and we're going to talk to some people who are alumni of our programs, and see if that's of interest to everybody. So let's get into it. For those that don't know, African Leadership Academy is the organization I and others on this call work for, and that's quite a well-known entity. One of our biggest programs is something called the Anzisha Prize. And it's a very simple idea. We're trying to encourage entrepreneurship as a career. And there's a whole rationale for that. And it's almost like getting people to stop smoking. It's a behavior change agenda, or getting people to care about climate. You know, it takes many, many years to change attitudes around careers. So we're busy between the awareness and attitude shift changes with our work, and we're producing things like movies that help people like parents and teachers think differently about how they see entrepreneurship, and particularly the transition from school to entrepreneurship. So that's the really important piece. It's how do you make transitions from school and university and those ages successful and safe, right, for young Africans to pursue. And that's not just about young Africans and their skills. There are all sorts of other people, teachers, policymakers, investors. Everyone has to change their attitudes towards how they feel about young people and their capabilities for those transitions to be successful. So we do it in 3 ways. We have work that influences young Africans with leadership potential themselves to choose this career. That's working in classrooms and with teenagers across the continent. Then we work with parents and teachers trying to influence their understanding of their aspirations for their own children and how entrepreneurship could be part of that. And then this is what we're doing today, which is the 3rd one, is trying to influence investors and policymakers, the people who come to places like Sunkelp, to say, what are you doing to make these transitions for young people into entrepreneurship more successful? Why do you keep playing at the top of the food chain with these big envelope sizes and only the tech sector and all this other stuff? If you really want to build pipeline, you need to partner with organizations like us. Otherwise, your pipeline will always be weak and you'll always be fighting. So that's why we're here. And hopefully over time, we can measure this, we can benchmark this. We have this many people on the session today, but in 5 years' time, I think Sunkelp's sessions from Anzisha are going to be the biggest sessions there are, because it's going to be where the issue is. Everybody's going to be fighting about how to get very young people with exceptional talent to choose entrepreneurship with our help. So we've started to do a lot of writing, like this book we're about to release this afternoon as a knowledge partner to Sunkelp, called Judge Better. It's how to judge entrepreneurship competitions, where it's not about the judges. It's about the participants and whether they're learning anything through this process, not about how famous the judges are and how critical they can be. So we've got a whole book on that and how to do that well. And we hope that that book will be really well read by people in universities and hubs and schools like us. And we've produced this really big piece of research, which essentially proves that young people are really good at hiring other young people. The Anzisha Fellowship that George is part of is a case in point. Just 140 people under the age of 25 when they were selected have gone on to create almost 2,500 jobs. It's quite a remarkable statistic. So the best people to hire young people are other young people because they're not afraid of hiring their friends. It's pretty simple. We're also about to release our 10-year impact report, and we're trying to not make it a boring impact report. So it's 11 lessons split into 4 themes, one of which we'll be talking about today. And things like you've got to invest in younger entrepreneurs because the economic imperative is clear. This is lesson 2 is an example of that, which is entrepreneurship as a branding problem. And you can see there, hopefully in the picture, you can see a young student, which may or may not be at African Leadership Academy in a dorm room, with 2 pictures of American entrepreneurs on the wall. We think that's a problem. Entrepreneurship in Africa does not have an awareness problem. It has a branding problem. People want to be entrepreneurs, but they're probably dreaming of being the wrong kind for where they live. So these are the kinds of lessons we unpack in our new impact report. We unpack all these different themes. People are not focused on secondary school, but only 6 to 9%, I forget the exact number of young Africans get to go to university. So surely we should be looking at secondary schools if we're trying to create more opportunities for people than university. Think about that for a minute. So one of our big focus areas of the impact report is how to create 1 million more work opportunities for young people by 2030 if we have a coordinated movement around entrepreneurship transitions and entrepreneurship as a career. And our 10th lesson of this new book that's coming is markets open when trust is borrowed. And we know this from the world of work. We know that if you come from a good school, and if you're a graduate with a good school, it's like wearing a big badge. It basically says, you should hire me because I'm somewhat clever and someone else says that I am. And how do you bring that concept to entrepreneurship? There is no credential that is widely recognized. There's no accounting qualification that says, you know, immediately qualified, you know. So we thought about this really hard and we said the only credential that investors understand is money. So we're going to give our young leaders a matching check to validate our belief in them, because we can't give them a degree that says they're entrepreneurs that are any good. And that's what we've gone to market with, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So here is the philosophy of our Young Entrepreneurs Fund. And maybe one of my colleagues could pop a link to the fact fund sheet in the chat. I really don't mind if people want to read the fact fund sheet that we have while they're listening to me. And this is a little bit of heavy text here, but essentially we're educators and we wanted to back our alumni, but we didn't want to become investors. How do you do that? We have really strong opinions, having taught entrepreneurship and entrepreneur finance for many years, about valuations and equity, and we think it's a terrible teaching experience. Try to convince a teenager of the value of their business, it doesn't work. Whereas a conversation about debt is a really, really healthy discussion, because it leads to a conversation about cash flow, not about how good you think you may be and what might happen. We learned a lot from Endeavor's Catalyst Fund, who also didn't want to break the trust between them and their entrepreneur cohorts around the world. And they came up with this idea of a rules-based guaranteed follow fund. Essentially, it's not about whether the investment is good or bad in the view of Endeavor. It's about whether a set of criteria are met. And if those criteria are met, the fund immediately follows. It's just according to a set of rules. We then heavily explored debt over equity. So we wanted to look at a debt fund. And the whole idea is to incentivize angel investors and others with money to invest younger, really. And we're hoping that by providing a matching check, they will do so. We've open sourced everything that we've done. So we've produced term sheets and knowledge and all sorts of things that we've created to run our fund. And they're available freely to whoever wants them. And we're hoping not to create some big fund. It's not our goal. Our hope is to see other people copying us. We really, really want people to steal what we've done. Nothing would make us more happy. So if you know anyone that wants to start a fund related to an education institution of any type, tell them they can come and steal everything from ours and see if it works for them and change it a bit and use it for their organization. We also, before we go into the panel, we also, there's some sort of academic or, I don't know, noteworthy context for what we do. There's a growing movement around structured exits over equity exits. Here's the definition from the upcoming book from Orny Patton-Power, who is well known, I think, to the Suncold community and impact investors more broadly as an expert and teacher in this field. And she's defined structured exits as these risk capital agreements where you definitely exit. I mean, that's really it. The point is there's a way to get the money out in a structured way. And we wanted that rather than what equity is, which is very difficult to get out of without a lot of luck. So here is the basics of our fund. Every year, any graduate from an ALA program can apply for a letter of guarantee. And once they can then shop that letter of guarantee around to investors they approach. If all the conditions are then met with the matching investor, we automatically deploy and they pay back according to their revenue. So they pay back 5% of their monthly revenues on a variable basis to the fund until they're done. There is now a way to early redeem or to exit early, which George was a big part of driving us rethinking that. And we're building a community of investors who would like to join us in matching our fund. And if you'd like to do that, you can contact Takoza. So that is the context. I think while we start the panel, if there's anything that I said that triggers a question or is of interest, please start popping them in the chat. And we're now going to head into the panel. Can I just get a sense? I think I'm doing okay for time, correct? Great.
Yes, Josh.
So yeah, please, we would love feedback. That's kind of the whole point of this exercise. And yeah, have a look at the fact sheet, and pop any questions or things that you think are of concern or interest in the chat, and we'll try and respond to them during our panel. So I am delighted to be joined by two amazing young entrepreneurs who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a really long time, actually, because they've been part of our programs for many, many years and are now definitely at the upper end of our alumni spectrum in terms of age, even though they're very young. And they have a lot of experience. And importantly, they have been very hesitant about our fund in various ways. You know, so we're going to have a conversation. This is not some glorification of some new idea. This is going to be hopefully an interesting discussion about what concerns young entrepreneurs when considering funding instruments. And we're also joined by my colleague and friend Takoza Mjo, who has been helping shape this fund and how we support entrepreneurs to access it. So, so we're going to get started. I'm just going to ask them each to introduce themselves in one sentence or two. And then I want you to use a word to describe how you feel about the term debt. We'll start with George.
Thanks, Josh. My name is George Baker. I'm an entrepreneur with a mission to build a Pan-African bank for small businesses. And I'm currently working on Pata Center, which is a factoring platform for SMEs to get credit to pay for their purchases. One word on debt is expectation.
Expectation. Thank you. Belinda?
Thanks, Josh, and hello to everyone. My name is Belinda, and I'm an education entrepreneur. I am a co-founder of Regrowth Schools in Zimbabwe, as well as founder of Atlantic International Schools in Rwanda. And what I feel about the word debt, I'm trying to think of a word that's not a synonym of debt. It's not a synonym of debt, but when I think debt, I think having a responsibility over somebody else's money for your own benefit.
I'm not going to comment as to whether that was one word or seven, but we'll carry on. Takoza, please introduce yourself and a word to describe your feelings on debt.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Thokoza Mjo. I am the head of support at Anzisha Prize. So I'm responsible for delivering business development support to the entrepreneurs. Complicated.
Thank you. So, so I think the reason I asked that is that debt is remarkably simple to teach, yet so poorly considered by the investment community when it comes to supporting entrepreneurs. And I think one of the things that we've realized is, what if the investment community thought of sort of early stage debt deals not necessarily as the way that they really generate return, but it's the way that they train entrepreneurs for the next phase of their fundraising. What debt does is, in our experience as educators, is it teaches really good habits around cash flow, money, repayment, and a responsibility towards this thing called money, whereas grants and equity have done the opposite. And it's a really, really interesting, set of dynamics. So I'm going to go back to our entrepreneurs, and I'd like either of you to share your earliest memories of approaching people for money. Can you share a story of how that went, and what did you ask for? Not the value, like what kind of money were you asking for, and for what purpose?
Yeah, I think for me the earliest time was 2012 when we approached a certain gentleman called Ashish Taka of Mara Foundation to give us an investment to set up a business hub. I don't remember being specific about what type of instrument we needed. We simply wanted investment to set up the space. And it's him who said that he would do a joint venture. So it would be, he would contribute capital, he would also contribute capital. That's the most recent I remember actually looking for capital at the time. Yeah.
And George, just how, for those that are, don't know you as well, how old would you have been then?
By then I was 19.
Right, so you're a 19-year-old entrepreneur, and you ask a very celebrated entrepreneur to support you. Do you feel that you had credibility? Do you feel that it was, how did you go into that room with confidence?
Okay, at the time when we went there, we had just been second runners-up for Anzisha Prize. And we also had a little bit of our own money. So we had $20,000 in our bag. So going into that discussion with my co-founder, Joachim, we felt we had something we are bringing to the table, not just by that we had set up this business before and gained some traction with it, but we also had our own money that we could bring to the table. So we wanted partnership from him to basically leverage what we were doing.
Yeah. So you actually had two things yourself. Well, one, you had a recently acquired badge from a private said,
Yes.
These guys are something. Someone else says they're good at this stuff called entrepreneurship. And then you had your own matching check, which de-risked consideration decision, right? I think those are really important for people on the call to understand how young entrepreneurs have to add additional credibility to their track records. Belinda, can you recall your earliest time of asking for money?
Yes, Josh. So my earliest time of asking for money, I was also 19 years old, like George, and it was my very first business venture in Zimbabwe. And what I asked for specifically, I remember in the presentation, I said debt or equity, although I had not a very deep understanding of what exactly it is that I was asking for. And I wasn't very successful in terms of acquiring that capital investment, which is how I viewed it at that time. And the main reason was because there was not much specificity in what it is that I was looking for. And two, it was like a fresh off the ground business. So no track record, no traction, just a business plan and projections of how I thought things were going to go. And the investors in that particular room were not necessarily, they were looking for more of a track record, more credibility before they could put in their money.
And what do you think would have made a difference in that conversation, holding true that you are still 19 with a very new business? What could have made it go differently?
I think what could have made it go differently was, one, if I had been more specific and I understood the language of investors and what it is that they were looking for specifically. That's one. And the second part of it as well, I think any other form of credibility would have gone a long way. So like George had mentioned, being part of the Anzisha Prize and being a semifinalist probably helped a long way in terms of saying, hey, we know what we're doing. And I did not have that backing at that time to say, hey, I know what I'm doing and this is probably going to work. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring Tokoza in now. So Tokoza's been getting, I think it's her second cohort of getting very young entrepreneurs investment ready. And I don't know if there's anything you can share, like what are the big takeaways about getting really young entrepreneurs investment ready to be better prepared for the situation Belinda spoke of? And secondly, how important is this badging in your experience, having been in the space for some time?
Sure. Thanks, Josh. I think just continuing on the point that Belinda made around having a track record and being able to present that in a way that I guess gives you as an entrepreneur in your business some credibility is really important. So we provide a financial readiness program where we work with our entrepreneurs who are looking to raise capital in the market. So we help them prepare for that. And I think one of the biggest gaps we've identified is that when entrepreneurs start their businesses, they don't really pay as much attention in terms of putting the relevant systems in place that allow them to collect data that can, present, I guess, patterns that they can show to prospective funders. The patterns, one, an indicator of past performance or past success, and also can be used to project what is possible in the future. So that's one area that we've really focused on helping our entrepreneurs pay a lot more attention to. And then secondly, I think the importance of, this borrowed trust, where we have a network of investors that are very aware of the quality of young people that we work with as part of the African Leadership Academy brand, who on the back of that are willing to have these conversations with our young entrepreneurs. So the role that we play in connecting our entrepreneurs to prospective investors, and just the fact that we are backing them already gives them that leg up. I would say those are the two things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to put George and Belinda on the spot a bit here, because so let's say you you have this conversation and you can put yourself back in your younger self, your early 20s now. And so this investor says, I love what you do, but I need you to go on an investment readiness program or something. And essentially what I find is we keep putting gates in front of the money, which are effort gates, right? It's like, go on this program, or, work with Tukoza for 2 years. And then if that goes well, I will, like, how does that feel? And how could investors reframe their relationships with you when they keep putting stuff in front of you before you have to get to the money? Like, does that make sense? Because I don't think we talk about how young people feel about this effort hurdle that we put on you all the time. Who wants to go first?
That's a good one. I remember when I was 19, between 19 and 22, I was very receptive because I felt I actually didn't know so many things. So go to a mentorship program, listen to a mentor. I felt like I was very receptive to it for the first 3 years. But then became frustrated a little bit when I felt that the things I need to execute need money. So if I can't execute those things, then what am I being mentored about, right? And I think at a certain time around 24, I had a little bit actually lost motivation to actually go for so many of these programs, because I was like, I'm going to listen to new ideas of what I need to do, but I have no money to actually execute them. So I think
fatigued, right?
I think I would say fatigued. But when I had the opportunity to tie money with learning, then it was always a good experience. Yeah.
Thank you. Belinda, do you share that or have a different take on it?
I do share that, and maybe I can just add to say, from my experience, I think if I were to say what investors should know or how they should reframe is within this ecosystem of investors and programs that support entrepreneurs, there needs to be a clearer pathway So I could resonate a lot with what George said about getting fatigued, about trainings and investment readiness programs and this and that before you can get to the money, because it takes a long time before you can reach those deliverables. And sometimes there's actually no finish line. There's no, okay, once I get to this stage and then my business grows to the next stage, and this is the level of training, and also tying each stage of growth, I think, with some incentive, some monetary incentive, something that would inspire entrepreneurs, because it takes money to make money in many instances, and it takes money to grow your business from one level to the next. So you can have all the systems in place, which is very, very important, as Tokoza had mentioned. However, if there's no money to boost and support those systems to help your organization mature and grow, then it becomes difficult, and then just redundant. The trainings become redundant, and there's actually no significant progress in your business. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I think often, as a sector, we don't realize the amount of attention pressure we put on your time. Often you're on 3 or 4 different programs at once, trying to access all these different opportunities. You're still trying to run your businesses. Tokoza's hounding you, I'm hounding you, 3 other accelerators are hounding you. You've got customers who you're trying to get to pay. And I think that's something that we need more empathy for. So I see people have joined our session, which I'm really grateful for, by the way. So thanks to everyone who's joined. And for those who are a bit later, I've just popped up a slide that explains the high level of our fund, which is a guaranteed follow revenue-linked debt fund for graduates of our program. And essentially what we're doing is saying, the best thing we can give our graduates is a matching check promise that they can shop around to investors. And then we don't have to do due diligence on the businesses because we're not investors, we're educators. So once an investor says they like George's or Belinda's business, they are able to draw down on the matching fund to either accelerate the growth or de-risk the investment, however they view it. And we've put the fund fact sheet link in the chat, which maybe someone could put in again for those that have just joined. So importantly, neither of the entrepreneurs yet, George is in the last consideration stages of being. We've had to sell this fund really hard. So, because it's a great idea, but we still, we've closed 3 deals so far and have another 3 in the pipeline. So George or Belinda, what is your gut feel about the fund? What do you think of what we're trying to do and the instrument that we've chosen? And you can be as candid as you like. You've already got your grades and passed. There's nothing we can do.
Well, what I think about the fund, it's very interesting. And one thing that I remember when you first sent the email with the information about the fund and you officially launched the fund was, this is a really interesting way to motivate me as an entrepreneur to actively seek out investments, because then there's a matching fund and I can be able to accelerate my growth much better and much faster. So it's really a good incentive as well for me as an entrepreneur to go out there and actually seek those investments. So yeah, that's what I think about it.
Great. So this helped you almost gain a bit of confidence to go out to the market to talk to other investors because there was this thing behind that you could talk about?
Yes, absolutely. And just that guarantee, that letter of guarantee goes a long way in terms of the conversations that I would have with investors. Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'll give you an anecdote based on that story, which is we've had people who've taken their letter of guarantee, shopped around, secured investment, and then dropped us as the match because they didn't find that the terms that we offered were great and they got everything they wanted, but the door was opened to the investor through the fund. So it's a really interesting concept where we achieved the outcome of incentivizing investment, but we didn't get any opportunity for return, which was disappointing, but I'm very happy with the outcome irrespective. George, you've had a lot of questions about the actual instrument and its structure, being someone with a strong finance background. So maybe you can talk to all these other finance people on the call about what you thought was wrong and what's good and that sort of thing.
Yeah, thanks, Joshua. I think first on the first question, I always thought that entrepreneurs need a sponsor who ties learning into their journey, right? So I want to put product to market how much cost do I need? I get funding for that until I basically get the stages through. So when the LA fund came through and it was speaking of that, I was really excited about it because I thought it's tying entrepreneurship planning straight up with the business growth, just as to start with. Specifically for us, I think by the time we applied for the fund, we had really gotten investment. I think prior to a lot of work we had already done with different partners. So I was excited in the sense that, oh, now investors are always looking who else is there. Now we had ALA, who is actually there, right? And when they saw the guarantee later, they actually became really even more interested in what we are trying to do. So I think there was a little bit of validation that this is not something just for them, but actually even other institutions could see value in it. That was one. Then just the structure of it, personally, I'm not yet really certain whether debt is the best instrument at this stage or it's equity. So I think I had a little bit of tit back with Mujo on why is it an equity instrument? Why is it a debt instrument? Because I think it grows the value that we present to another investor and say, look, ALA thinks my business is worth $1 million and they have actually put money to it. Let's basically build on it. But outside that, I like that it is really linked with revenue because even equity, you pay on profit. So it's actually also revenue driven. You pay dividends on revenue. So even this one is a little bit tied to revenue, which means if you make money, you pay. If you don't make money, you don't. Which then for me feels like it aligns the investor, ALA, with the business to ensure that we actually make revenue to actually get out a return. Because for me, it's always around alignment of what we are doing with the investor's expectation to meet it. So
Thanks, George.
that's quickly what I could mention, yeah.
So there are a couple of questions have come through, and Tukoza and I can maybe answer them a bit together. So the conditions that have to be met before we issue a loan, it's very, very simple. You have to be an alumnus in good standing with the academy. And good standing is a little bit subjective, but we use the same criteria for whether we will recommend someone for an internship or a job as a recently graduated student. So we have a good standing measure, right? And that's an internal one. So are you an alumnus in good standing? The second one is, has another investor invested into your business or is at the term sheet stage? And then we do due diligence on the co-investor, not the entrepreneur. So we speak to that investor, Tukoza, myself, and another colleague of ours, Matilda, and we just make sure that they've invested before and have done some form of due diligence, because we're not going to do due diligence on George's business or Belinda's business, because we've done due diligence on George and Belinda as leaders, right? That's why you're trusting ALA's check and we're trusting your check because you've thought about the business. And we think that's where the partnership between education organizations and investment professionals needs to yin yang, for lack of a better term. What we're seeing is education institutions building up investment capabilities. And we think that's not necessarily the right way. Why should people who specialize in learning suddenly have to learn how to do due diligence and think about all that stuff? There are so many sectors in a student body, whereas an investor would specialize by sector or by other kinds of metrics or stage. We would never be able to, as an education institution, cover the full gamut of what our student body would ultimately choose to do. So we're outsourcing that part. And then once those checks are done, there's a couple of other things that we check. You have to commit to a monthly coaching conversation with Tukoza. You have to send us monthly management accounts, and your first 3 tranches of money, the money is tranched for the first quarter. Until you've got those 3 things within those 3 months, the last tranche isn't released. So you have to deploy some behavior change if you haven't got that already. And then that's how we deploy the money. So I hope that's helpful. And then The choice of debt, was it based on the inability to negotiate with on the fact that finance? No, it's, we just, importantly, we will match equity rounds. So if George rages an equity round, we will participate, but without debt note, as long as everybody's comfortable with that. So it's not like there has to be a collective debt round for us to participate. But no, the choice of debt is actually a philosophical one. We think that people who are transitioning entrepreneurs, and George and Belinda are not those cases anymore, but they were 5 years ago. We think that debt is a better teaching tool, and we as an institution need to help everybody become better prepared through practice, which the debt instrument will give them with Tokoza support over 2 or 3 years, and then get them ready for more sophisticated or higher yielding instruments with liquidation that could actually take place. Like, liquidity events are so rare, we just wanted to force the issue. So that's the answer there. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Tokoza.
No, I think you've covered it all, Josh.
Okay, great. So, so one last point before we break out into some groups to allow people to give us some advice on how do we take this idea to other organizations and spread it. We just need this community's help to say, how do we talk about this to people like you? My colleagues and I are going to break into sessions to do that. But one of the things that we spoke about in preparation for this call is how context really matters. And I would like the closing arguments for all three, just to say, contextual understanding by investors when investing is critical for two things: geography and age, right? Like where you're doing it, and obviously sector. And Belinda, I think you were quite passionate about this. So why don't we start with you? Why is it so critical for investors to understand context? And what do you mean? Like what skill or approach would you like them to take if they're going to engage a young entrepreneur like you better?
All right, great question, Josh. I am quite passionate about this because in my experience as an entrepreneur, when interacting with investors, there is this preset conception of like how the market is supposed to look like, how business is supposed to look like, for example, and you add the layer of one. I'm a very, or at least I was a couple of years ago, a very young entrepreneur with not much proven track record, for example. And then the second part of it is the context that I'm operating in. So for example, a country like Zimbabwe would have very specific context and needs versus a country like Rwanda. So what I would want the investors to do is to be creative and understanding to be creative in terms of how they're thinking about financing and supporting young entrepreneurs, one, and to tie in their investment mindset and their investment structures to the various organizations, I would say, that are within the ecosystem that are helping high school graduates to get better at being entrepreneurs and get better at running businesses. So have that tied in together, because if that's not there, high school graduates. So I would say for me, I believe that I was in a very privileged and exceptional position being a graduate from the African Leadership Academy, because they actually teach entrepreneurship there and we get to learn a little bit more about it. But another typical graduate from my country won't have learned anything about entrepreneurship. So they are interested, they are passionate, they have a dream and a vision. However, they don't have the correct skills and mindsets in terms of how to start and be effective, how to set up the systems, and even just how to write proposals, for example, something as simple as that. So I would say investors need to have that at the back of their mind and then partner with organizations such as Anzisha to actually say, okay, we're interested in investing younger. How do you help us increase capacity in these young entrepreneurs with high potential? And then as you do that, as you go through the stages, this is how we're going to invest. And to just always make sure that you're investing the right kind of investment at the right time for the business.
Thank you so much. George, your view on context for investors?
I think context in terms of understanding the market is important, but I think for me it's context of the business. How do we align the investor's expectation of return with the entrepreneur's expectation of growth, right? For me, the only mismatch normally comes in if we can't align that. And if we can't align that, then we normally say not to even a good investor actually, because we think we cannot meet the expectation they have, or perhaps they can't meet the expectation we have. So for me, it's really more around understanding the business growth cycle and seeing whether based on that projection, the business will be able to actually meet the investor's expectation. And I think then if those meet, then I'm like, let's do it. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. I think it's a great closing. Thokoza, your thoughts?
I think most importantly is who's developing the pipeline. Are investors thinking a little bit more about the organizations that are actually doing the work and developing the pipeline that creates the investment opportunities for them? And what are investors doing to support or to collaborate with those organizations that are building up this pipeline? So, yeah.
Thank you. So I will just add that as someone who's been working with young people for some time, you've got to learn the tools of working with young people. And the demands that investors place on young people to work with them are intense. We require them to learn all sorts of skills about how to model money and like talk to them in a language that investors understand. And I think the reciprocal effort is virtually zero. You know, if you study some basic psychology and stuff, the frontal lobe of a 24-year-old has not fully developed until that age that does some of the rational decision making. And then you want to do some of these conversations with a 19 to 20-year-old and you treat them in the same way that you would someone who's 30 something. There's skills you can learn on how to approach some of these conversations that I think investors have not bothered to invest in. And I think that's really poor form. So that would be something that I think we would be really eager to help people learn how to talk to young people, because I think it could create the circumstance that George talked about, where these conversations are actually much more equal and meaningful. So we're going to break out now into groups. My colleagues, Melissa, Didi, Nolizwe, Thokoza, I think that's it. How many rooms do we have? Can I, and the basic ask is we want to take this on the road. We've got all this stuff and a year's worth of work, and we want to share it with other organizations that are like education or leadership ones, as well as schools and universities. Where should we go? And what could get in the way? Like from what you've heard today, what are the kinds of things that you expect we're going to face as obstacles? And how could we prepare to talk that through over the coming years while we try to get more organizations to pursue some sort of guaranteed match approach to funding and meet the investor community halfway? So I hope that's going to be an interesting discussion. We want you to really help us rather than learn more. And in small groups, we hope that's possible. Thank you so much for your time. If you thought that was good, maybe write clap in the chat so we know. If you thought it was poor, please send me something private so I can improve my my delivery. And yeah, just from Anzisha and African Leadership Academy, very grateful. But we'll see you back here with some thoughts at the end. Welcome back. So just want to thank everybody. I don't know if if I could ask maybe for a quick summary of what came out of each room before we close. So I'm going to ask Didi to go first with what happened in room 2.
No, room 1. Oh, hi. Sorry, my laptop died, so I'm joining in with Thokoza. So we had more of a clarification session, so people really getting into the nitty-gritty of the fund, and also how Anzisha operates as well. And I think some of the suggestions came around streamlining our focus on who to approach for investors and schools, and how do we expand the organizations or investors that we approach when we're operating from Southern Africa and we want to reach East, West, and North.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Room 3.
Sure, yeah. So ours was very similar to Didi and Thokoza's room. It was more of a clarifying session, talking about the details of the fund. And then from that, we spoke a lot about the importance of the entrepreneurs being investment ready, and how organizations like the Anzisha Prize can provide that sort of investment readiness. And then lastly, we discussed your last point on how the investors themselves can meet the young entrepreneurs halfway. And we spoke about how they can have supportive structures around the investment and not just investing and then waiting for returns, but how can they have an ongoing relationship to support the young entrepreneurs? Yeah.
Great. And I think, Nolly, were you in the last room?
Yes, I was. So we talked a lot about mindsets and attitudes towards debt, and how, one of the big challenges is getting buy-in in different kinds of communities, but also in schools where you already have a set curriculum and time constraints. How do you then bring this kind of instrument or fund into the school's work? And then also just thinking about how do you invest in more than just, how do you ensure that the investment is going towards helping the young entrepreneur also grow their business? And we then talked about role modeling being an important part of changing some of the attitudes towards entrepreneurship, but also debt as well. Yeah. So those are just some of the points.
Great. Thank you. So I think there was one last room that I was in with Erica. It was a small room, so we had a really good chat. And she gave me this really interesting nugget of how to combine people who would come into the main fund and sort of conditionalize their participation in investing in the individual entrepreneurs on a matching basis, which I'm definitely going to run with. That is it. So I just want to offer my gratitude to our team for helping set up, and Sunculp for the opportunity, and my all-star guests, Belinda and George. You have amazing businesses. You are why we are all here. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you for making time from your business to educate the rest of us on how we can better engage you. And I hope everyone else has a wonderful rest of Sunculp 2021. See you in Nairobi 2022 with a bit of luck and a vaccine.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.